Continue with our rolling news coverage of the coronavirus. The nation waiting on President Cyril Ramaphosa to address us, to talk to us about his meeting with business leaders and other stakeholders, political parties. With me now, Arabile Gumede. You know him, of course. He is the one who's always watching the screen at the JSC, interpreting for us what the numbers are. This time we're talking about different numbers.
Yeah.
Kind of numbers we're expecting from President Cyril Ramaphosa, and that is the cost to the economy, how we're going to mitigate that. And this country here, China, this is where it all began.
Yeah.
And many economists say there's a lot to learn from...
I mean, there certainly is, and we'll hopefully scroll through the numbers, right, SABC, and we'll actually see a whole lot more with regards to this case study. This is a live page, of course, right? So it does consistently update. So if you see it blinking ever so consistently, don't mind that too much. Just wanted to really touch on China as well then, as that primary case, of course, of where this all happened, particularly out in Wuhan province. There's a market out there as well that now has been closed because that is where the virus itself stems from. But with 81,000 confirmed cases of the coronavirus out in China, that's 72,440, means that 90% of those people have actually recovered from COVID-19 itself, right? So that means they've tried to institute, whether it be self-isolation or some sort of treatment on their own. They've certainly tried to make a way to make sure. Now, that does not mean that this figure is not hurtful, right? Nobody's saying that. What we're saying, however, is that with a 90% recovery rate, it means that it is beatable. We certainly can do it. We just need to ensure that we implement what the president has really asked us to. Stay at home as often as possible and as much as possible. Ensure that you self-isolate in many ways as well, and try to ensure that social distancing is a norm now. If we keep scrolling up this list now, and you'll really see that Europe begins to take on really what is going on here and how big an impact it really is. The likes of France also sitting there, and just look at how this list continues to grow in terms of recovered. And I want to really focus on that, because I feel like we've seen a massive panic around the globe, SABC, and unfortunately, even locally, we're seeing things like toilet paper run out. I just want us to make note of the fact that we make our own toilet paper, and we export toilet paper too. Meaning that if every other country was to close off their borders, we would have our own toilet paper to still take in. We wouldn't run out.
Perhaps you can solve a mystery for me.
Sure.
Toilet paper?
It goes down to basic needs.
Buying of toilet paper?
You know, you'd be surprised that what is the first thing.
I believe this is a respiratory disease.
Well, surprisingly, right? That's the connotation people make. It really boils down to just basic needs, SABC. And what people begin to think is that I cannot avoid two things: eating and, unfortunately, excretion. Which means that I need to make sure that I can eat and I can solve my excretion problem too. And those are the two basic things that seem to be
way
solved.
Over my head. So let's go back to that. South Korea, very important.
Yeah. I mean, that continues to be that takes on exactly what's happening out in Asia, right? Look, Asia itself is trying to find a way to deal with this. It is minimizing it and getting a lot more in terms of recoveries, less people dying as well. As you can see, South Korea only has 2 people having passed away today. I'm not, again, minimizing that number. What I'm saying, though, it is that they're trying to contain it. It's very promising
to show the world that it's not insurmountable. But before we carry on to other countries, Arabile, I want to stay in the Asia region.
Sure. People
have said there's a lot to learn from China, but that there's also at a great cost. So what is important to understand is it because of the policy interventions that were made and when they were made?
So I think it's also just fast acting fast. And the 2 top cases really show you that. One, China, yes, they do have the fiscal response and the monetary response as well to handle that. They cut interest rates. They plowed a whole lot of money into that economy as well. So that certainly does mean that they were able to respond very quickly. Italy were unfortunately unable to respond very quickly to the saga. So unfortunately, things then did escalate out of control. So it became a really big issue for them. Those really do tell you exactly what has happened out in those 2 different parts. And if you're able to respond quickly, which South Africa may not necessarily have been able to do, that is the problem, unfortunately. We need to act very quickly. I'm not saying let's go into lockdown, because it begins to create even more panic. But what we certainly can do is try to create an environment that is perhaps a whole lot more conducive. We need to try and create an economic stimulus plan. Business needs to play its its part here by ensuring that people are able to go on leave, and it isn't necessarily counted as leave in a time like this. We are in a state of disaster.
So, Arabile, hold the thought. We'll talk more about the economies of the globe, but I just want to read a media statement that has come through. It's a story that we spoke about earlier on. The presidency is saying that he welcomes Reverend Kenneth Misha's submission for a coronavirus test, saying that he welcomes the announcement by the ACP leader that he did get tested. Reverend Misha himself was among the leaders, the political leaders that were meeting with the president in Cape Town on Tuesday, the 17th of March. Reverend Misha has since, of course, confirmed publicly that in the days before that meeting, and therefore he has submitted to the prohibition of public gatherings, as in the restriction of movement. Reverend Misha has been asymptomatic. This is very important to mention, and the presidency is saying that he welcomes his adherence to this. So, as we mentioned, as the country tries to adhere to the measures being put in place, the president is at the moment speaking to various stakeholders at the union buildings at the moment. We will have more news as and when it comes in. So he's here.
I wanted to really touch on the Diamond Princess, if you will allow me, Tepiso. And that is really just a boat, of course, stuck off the coast of Japan initially. And really questions were asked as in, people have contracted this virus. Should they be kept on board? Should they not? What exactly is the issue? And this was pretty much the perfect case study. If ever you needed a case study to kind of see exactly how this virus works, and we'll hopefully get onto it, 8 people passing away really just means, and a lot of those people over the age of 70, kind of tells you how the virus sort of performs, right? 567 odd, that's around nearly 80% or so of those people having recovered from the virus, means that there is a way to beat it, in the sense of trying to make sure that you aren't a part of everyone in there. And this really is a flatlining of that curve that we keep trying to talk about, right?
Yes.
So you don't want to get people too worried and work themselves up into a stupor, which we unfortunately do get. That does, however, mean that we do need to follow procedures. And if we continue to do that, everything from cleaning right through to keeping a whole lot more healthy will certainly help.
Answer this question. We'll look at countries like Iran. We spoke about South Korea. Italy, there is no way getting around that. We have to talk about Italy. Does it have to get worse before it gets better?
That's the unfortunate part, right? That for it to even be at the case it's at right now, it's already worse. And we're hoping that it doesn't get any worse from the current scenario. But what you're finding now from Italy is that they've had to respond quite aggressively in order to get anything done in that country. Complete lockdown is pretty much what they're kind of sitting at. And just to make note as well of that complete shutdown, that complete shutdown doesn't mean that nobody's allowed to leave at all, and you aren't allowed to get any of your resources that you may need. Remember that the likes of Amazon have hired over 100,000 people to go into work there, because they need all those people. 150,000 odd being hired by Walmart, because they need more people to kind of deliver the goods too. So it does tell you that in a time like this, there is going to be the ability to still have the resources you kind of need. It won't just be
I wanted
all black.
to talk about the workforce as well, but I must just say very quickly, Arabile, to the viewers, in reading that statement, there is one very important line that I should have read, and that is the presidency really emphasizing that the president's health is in no danger. The president, therefore there's no reason for the president to be tested. To the best of the president's knowledge, no person whom he has recently had contact with, including Reverend Misha, has symptoms or tested positive for the virus. So that's from that statement released earlier on. We'll continue with Arabile Gumede to talk about the workforce, the impact on economies, especially developing nations that rely on commodity prices and the exchange rand with the US dollar, in just a moment. So do stay with us, don't go away. I mentioned earlier on that the WHO and the United Nations saying that they put the cost at global level, $1 trillion US, what it could cost us, and they are urging countries to spend now. Don't hold back to avoid a meltdown. We were looking at the case of China. So countries such as South Africa, or indeed a lot of the countries who on this continent, depending on raw materials, that is something that's probably going to hurt our pockets, given what is possibly a global meltdown on the financial market.
Look, for one, let's remember that even just something mundane as a part for a vehicle, which comes from overseas, is definitely not going to come to South Africa now, because, borders and manufacturers are shut in certain parts of the world, including production sites out in China, which is where we get a lot of our production as well for a lot of our motor vehicles. And if they get shut down, remember that that's about 8% of South Africa's GDP that we're talking about, the manufacturing sector alone, and we're talking about vehicles, which is a huge export market for South Africa. So that gets dented, and that's just one segment that we're talking about. That $1 trillion figure, I believe it's actually going to rise to a whole lot more, but they are 100% right. Spend now. We saw South Africa's growth projections from the South African Reserve Bank dip down to 0.2% in contraction. So that's going to be no growth for this year, and headed into negative territory. It will be the first time in quite an extensive period that South Africa hasn't had any growth, and really for the year going to negative territory. But it is pretty telling of what the scenario is. We've already had supposedly two economic sort of impacts or solutions to South Africa's growth trajectory right now. One of those has been the cut by 100 basis points by the South African Reserve Bank in terms of the interest rates. What that does is it ultimately says to consumers, look, we're going to try to decrease your debt as much as possible in terms of how much you need to pay. Hopefully it creates a little bit more spending in your pocket as well, which will continue to boost the economy. The second thing is the major announcement by Standard Bank today, which is to say that we will try to give you a 3-month holiday if you're a small business or a student. What that does is it ensures that people continue to not feel the punishment or the push, indeed to have to pay off their debt immediately in order to succumb or rather aid these businesses as well. I don't think they'll be the last ones, of course. More announcements will come through from other banks. Standard Bank not necessarily known for being the first to these announcements, but certainly really important that it did come through. And I expect to see a similar notion from the likes of Discovery, the likes of Old Mutual as well. It is something that's bound to happen.
So I'm curious about something. We saw President Donald Trump earlier on in the week speak about $850 billion in terms of the stimulus package that he's looking for from the central bank. What can we afford, and how can we package it? President sitting there at the moment saying just how bad is the likely impact?
Yeah, look, how much do we need? Well, how long is a piece of string? It depends really on how long this really goes on for, right? And if this continues to go on for quite some time, we could need how much we spend in a year just for this situation.
But, I mean, a country like ours, we obviously dependent on the commodity prices with the fluctuation on the world markets. That's very difficult. We normally export. That is obviously being curbed given the conditions around COVID-19. How badly is that likely to impact us? And I say this against the backdrop of 2008. Many people thought developing nations would feel the impact even more, but we did weather the storm a little bit better than expected.
But let's remember that that was a different time, because we had been able to, in that time, garner up a whole lot of deficits which turned into surpluses. We had a trade surplus, so our ability to trade with other countries was still sitting in positive territory, right? We had a budget surplus, so we were spending less than we were collecting in taxes, right? So those things kind of tell you we had a current account surplus, so our bank account was sitting in positive territory. We had those. It was a triple surplus for South Africa, so we were able to deploy a whole lot more money. It is at a time like that, actually, that we should have had a sovereign wealth fund, which would have been able to help us right now. And that is actually the notion that people should be asking ourselves about. Why did we not employ these measures when we were sitting in what is supposedly the good times?
But the Treasury even talking about that sovereign wealth fund at the moment is saying that there are no clear specifications of how that is going to be employed. Where exactly is the money coming from as well? High in debt, low on revenue, and the $5 billion we've set aside at the moment to deal with this.
That's absolutely paltry. That won't even help a single province in the fight against COVID-19, right? So I can tell you now we're going to need a whole lot more. 100 billion might not even cut in, and I'm talking about rands here. 100 billion may just help one province in this country. And that means that out of the 9, you're going to need about 900 billion. We're already edging towards R1 trillion there. And that is just my estimation on my own. It's an uneducated guess on that front. So don't even use that as
Your
anything to go by.
Your guess is as good as anyone's. Even the most educated guesses probably would be spot on. But thank you so much for stepping in and taking us through this. As you can see, the global summary, 332,134 confirmed cases. But as we keep on saying, we've got to look at this figure, 29.19%. That is over 96,958 people around the globe who have recovered from COVID-19. Thank you so much, Arabile Gumede. He'll be back on your television screens tomorrow at 1 p.m. And do remember that that is probably when President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to address the nation, anytime in the morning, afternoon. But we'll keep you posted. It has been a week since President